All healthy relationships have one thing in common, and that thing is boundaries, healthy boundaries. The thing about therapy is that the number one determinant of success in therapy is the quality of the relationship that the therapist and the client have together. If the quality of the relationship is a number one determinant for success in therapy, and all relationships have boundaries for them to be successful, we can conclusively say that therapy cannot work without healthy boundaries. In this episode, we are going to be talking about the types of boundaries that a therapist must set with their clients so that therapy can be successful. If you're a therapist and you're listening, please go to the comment section and tell me what are some of the challenges that you have experienced when you've tried to set boundaries with a client. Before we get started, I just want to point out that this episode is going to be more beneficial to therapists and mental health professionals. But if you're not a therapist, if you are not in the mental health field, I still invite you to stay and listen, because you're going to learn about the inner workings of therapy as a whole and some of the things that your therapist thinks about before they get into therapy with you. So yeah, let's get into this. Therapy is one of those professions where the therapist has to set the boundaries. It is their duty and their responsibility to set boundaries, communicate them, and enforce them. It's not the client's responsibility. And as a therapist, you have the dual role of communicating your own boundaries and the boundaries that govern the therapeutic relationship. This is not only for your protection, but for the protection of the client and to ensure that you are complying with the ethical requirements of the profession. And I'm sure all of us have sat through a counseling ethics class where we've been taught about the things we need to do for us to maintain the ethics of the profession, and setting boundaries is a priority in that essence. There are two reasons why you need to set healthy boundaries within the therapeutic relationship. The number one reason is because poor boundaries can affect your client's mental health. So the client came to you with an issue and you have not set healthy boundaries to govern that relationship. The client might leave that relationship in a worse state that they came in. And I can talk about that, I can explore that in a different episode just to understand how poor relationships affect the client's mental health in general. But in this episode, I don't think we'll be able to get into it. The other thing is, unhealthy boundaries or poor boundaries also affect your personal reputation as a therapist. Remember that your clients will talk to their friends. Remember your clients will talk to their family members. They will tell people about you. They will recommend you to somebody who's looking for a therapist. Sometimes even clients go online and talk about their therapists. That's a thing. And therapists also talk to each other. We know the kind of people that we recommend our clients to. So we refer clients to each other within the network. And so if you are a therapist who has very poor boundaries, it will be very difficult for me as a therapist to recommend any clients to you, because I know when they come to you, they're going to have a very unprofessional experience. And that is not something that we want. We want to support each other. So you need to make it easier for other therapists to recommend you, for your clients to recommend you to their friends and to their relatives and to their colleagues. And number one thing that will help people recommend you and recommend your work is your boundaries. As I've said in the beginning, every relationship has to have healthy boundaries. And a therapeutic relationship is no different. If you do not have healthy boundaries, it will fall apart. Everything will fall apart. You as a therapist, having and communicating and enforcing healthy boundaries is just an indicator that you will not intentionally harm the client, and also that you are fully committed to act in the client's best interests. So let's talk about the areas where in therapy, you as a therapist must set boundaries, healthy boundaries with the client. Number one, self-disclosure. We have all heard about self-disclosure. It's when you as a therapist tell the client something about yourself. Sometimes it's something personal, sometimes it's something professional. It all depends. But here's the thing. Your client is not your best friend. Your client is not somebody that you're there to swap stories with. Your client cannot come to therapy. They tell you something and you go like, "Wah, Aki, even me, I went through that. I understand what you're going through, because even me, Aki guy, yeah, even me, I suffer like that." And I know it can feel like you need to tell the client something about yourself so that it feels like you can completely relate with them. You need to set boundaries around that, because everything you say in therapy can be taken out of context by the client. Everything you say in therapy can also be taken literally by the client. Everything you say in therapy has an impact on the client. You can't just be talking and trading stories as if you're talking to your best friend. And I think that's part of the reason why we keep getting told therapy is not your place as a therapist to explore your issues. Therapy, the therapy room, the therapy session is for the clients. It is their time. It is their time to deal with their own personal issues. And if you as a therapist have your own personal issue that is going on, take that to your own therapy. You cannot sit in therapy and start trading stories with your client ever. Yes, it's okay to tell your clients some things about yourself. Of course, you're a human being. Of course, there's some issues that are going to come up. Your client can ask you a direct question. They can ask you, are you married? Do you have children? And you can't sit there and pretend that you're not going to answer them. There's a way to answer these questions. And you need to answer these questions and to talk about yourself in therapy in a very measured way. Be aware of the times that you're talking to your clients in therapy just to seek validation from them. Don't bring up things about yourself just because you want to feel good or you want your client to think that you're smart. At the end of the day, your client is in therapy because they are looking for support with the things that they are going through. They're not in therapy to find a best friend. They may think that they want to be friendly with you. And sometimes it's because the therapeutic relationship is often very healthy, it's very safe. And so the client feels heard and seen in ways that other people outside do not hear and see them. And that can distort their feelings when it comes to you as a therapist. And that's, of course, what we call countertransference and transference and all those things. So be aware that everything you say in therapy, the client is going to think about it further, even without you knowing. Sometimes you can say something and you've planted a seed. Sometimes you can say something that can make the client see you as in a light that you do not want to be seen in. So be very careful about the things that you say in therapy. Be very careful about the things you disclose to your client. Remember, the client will leave the therapy session and they will take whatever you say with them. The one question that you need to ask yourself so that you know whether this self-disclosure that you're about to do is useful or not is to ask yourself, does this contribute to the client's healing journey? If it is not, do not bring it up. If it is, then you can bring it up. Again, tact and being careful about the things you say is the way to go. So think about it that way. The next area that you need to set boundaries and communicate them and enforce them is physical touch. Many therapists have found themselves in very difficult situations because of touching clients. And I know you are probably giving the client a hug just to comfort them. Maybe they are going through something very difficult and you feel for them because you're a human being. Maybe you feel that let me give this client a hug, or the client comes and gives you a hug. Physical touch is very touchy. It's a touchy subject. You need to be very careful about how you touch your clients and if you touch your clients at all. If you're in a situation where you feel that you need to touch the client in whatever way, maybe you need to pat their back because they're crying, or you need to rub their shoulder or something, just be super careful about it. Use your wisdom to understand whether that touch can be misconstrued as something else. It can be innocent on your part and turn out to be something else when context is taken out. So ask yourself, is this touch going to be treated differently? Is this touch going to be misunderstood? Because if it is misunderstood, you might find yourself in a very difficult position trying to explain why you are touching a client. It can be very easily be misinterpreted. It can easily be misinterpreted into sexual harassment and you don't even know it. So be very careful, and especially when the client is of the opposite gender. You don't want to land yourself in a problem just because you give a client a hug, and it can happen. I'm not saying these things by the way to make you afraid or to make you paranoid. I'm saying them so that you can think about them when you're about to do them. Just have them at the back of your mind. They will help you maintain your boundaries. They will help you maintain your professionalism in situations that are a bit tricky that nobody can really tell you what to do. So this is the part where you lean on your wisdom, your clinical wisdom and your wisdom as a human being. You need to understand how to address touch, know when it is appropriate to touch a client. Again, handshakes are safer than most other forms of touch because a handshake can really be misrepresented or misunderstood. It's just a handshake. So yeah, think about it that way. And also in the therapy room, if you're having, let's say, an in-person session, make sure that your therapy room has enough sitting space, that you are not in the client's personal space and they are not in your personal space. You don't want to be sitting in a therapy room where you and your client's knees are touching because the room is so tiny or the seats are too close to each other. You want to have enough room that people feel the freedom to move around and they feel that their personal space is not being invaded. That will help make the client feel at ease, and it will also make you feel at ease. Because remember, sometimes you're the person that the client is invading their privacy. So sometimes you're on the receiving end. The client is the one who is in your space. The client is the one who is sitting too close. The client is the one who's talking too close to your ear. these things happen. So be careful in that sense. Yeah, if you're doing a virtual session, I think you're pretty safe because you're not touching anybody anywhere. It's just you and the computer or your phone and the client and the computer or their phone. And there's that distance that has already been created for you. So yeah, think about personal touch, think about physical touch, be very careful with it and use it wisely if you have to use it at all. The number 3 area you need to think about when you are setting boundaries in therapy as a therapist is giving and receiving gifts. So in the course of your work, there's going to come a time where your client will show up with a gift. The gift could be as big and expensive as a designer watch. It could be a handbag if you are a lady. It could be, as a guy, you're a therapist, your client could bring you a tie, or it could be something homemade. Maybe they make banana bread at home and they decide to bring you banana bread. Or they are a farmer and they bring you produce from their land. It could be anything really. It could be even a card that they have bought at the supermarket, or they have made the card themselves. They like crafts and stuff. It could be anything really. And when that situation happens, I know the first instinct you'll have is to go like, no, I can't accept this. Because you've constantly been told, do not accept gifts from clients. I know this is something I was told a lot when I was studying in school. It's something that I've had many, many times repeated in therapy settings. Do not accept gifts from your clients. Do not accept gifts from your clients. That's what you're told. And so that time will come for you and you will be thinking, what should I do now? Should I accept this gift or should I not accept this gift? This rule for not accepting gifts from your clients can feel very restrictive. And I'm not here to tell you, Ati, don't accept gifts, say no, reject them. I'm also not here to tell you, reject that rule and say yes to gifts when your client shows up with a Lamborghini. Accept it. That is not what I am saying. What I will highly advise you to do is to think about the motivation and the symbolism underlying this exchange of gifts. What is the client trying to do, consciously or unconsciously, by giving you this gift? That is what I mean. You need to understand your client's background and their origin and their culture. Sometimes it's very innocent. They're bringing you a gift because they feel that you guys have had a good connection. And sometimes they're giving you a gift because they want something from you and they don't even know it. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's unconscious. And so you need to think deeper about the reasons behind why a client is giving you a gift. Don't go and start questioning, grilling your client and being like, why are you giving me this gift? Oh, where do you come from? Oh, are you trying to manipulate me? Oh, sijui nini nini. Do not do that. That is unprofessional, and I know you would not do it because you are a professional therapist. What I'm asking you to do is think about the things that your clients do. There's a reason behind these things. Sometimes those reasons are innocent. Sometimes those reasons are very targeted. In most cases, small, inexpensive, handmade gifts are acceptable. Like, it's just being human. But when it's expensive, when it's a big gift, when it's a very... When the gift comes immediately after you guys have discussed something that is very heavy, or when the gift comes when when in therapy you guys broached a very touchy subject, those things could mean something. So think about it that way. I'm not saying all gifts mean something. I'm saying you have to think about what the gift means before you accept it. And that does not mean stand there with the client and start thinking when the client is just standing there holding the gift for you and they're like, shika ndio nimekuletea Lamborghini, and you're like, what is this client trying to do right now? That is not how it's going to play out. You just need to be professional about it. And I know this can be a very interesting topic to go into. I want you to think hard about it. But if you have any specific questions about it, just drop them in the comments, or wherever you're listening to this, just drop them in the comments and let's discuss it further. You can come to a Telegram group and ask about that question and hear what other therapists are talking about. The link is in the description. The next area of boundary setting is dual relationships. You've had this thousands of times. You've had it spoken about in school. You've had other therapists speak about it. Dual relationships are a huge problem that happens among therapists and clients. You cannot have your client as your friend outside of therapy for whatever reason. It does not matter what, unless it really is necessary that you have that relationship outside of therapy. There are situations where you and the client will see each other outside of the therapy room and you can't really control it. So think about it like this. And I've written about this in my book, this one, Dear Beginner Therapist, you should read it. I've written about it here that you should think about dual relationships. Think about it this way. Let's say you're a staff therapist and you work in a company where you are the therapist for the employees. When you are in the therapy room, you're the therapist. But then, after the session is over, and you guys go out to the office and you have to go to lunch and there's a communal cafeteria, you're no longer just the therapist. You are now a colleague. So what happens in that situation? Do you high five them like you high five other people, other colleagues? Do you give them a hug when you meet on the office corridors? How do you interact with the client? Again, your wisdom here. So dual relationships can happen in that sense, but they are not always that open. They are not always that obvious. Sometimes dual relationships happen when a therapist is working with a client, and let's say the client, is a lawyer, and you're having a legal issue as a therapist or a legal question. It's not even a big deal. It's just a question you have, and you're thinking, who can I call to ask this legal question? Instead of paying a lawyer, what if I call that client of mine who is a lawyer and just ask them these questions? That's a problem. That's a problem because that client is not your legal representation. That client is your client, and whatever questions you have, you need to find a legal person to help you with that legal issue. And that occurs in everything. If your client is a plumber and you have a clogged sink, that is not the time to call them and be like, hey, I know you're out of work right now, najua umekutafuta job, and I have a plumbing issue. Do you want to come and make some extra money fixing my pipes or something along those lines? You do not want to do that. That is a dual relationship. There are many, many cases of dual relationships, and they happen all the time. So you need to be very careful about how you deal with those relationships. Don't make obvious dual relationships when they can be avoided. There are situations where obviously a relationship can't be avoided. If, like for example, in my case and the case of many therapists who are in social media and on the internet, we are going to meet some of our clients out there in the world. Maybe you're going to be in the same social circles. Maybe there's a training on social media, how to become a good social media expert, right? And me as a therapist and also as a social media person, I want to learn about how to advance my social media. So I might find myself in the same circle with a client who is also participating because maybe they also have their own personal brand that they're trying to develop. Or I might find that actually the person facilitating the program, the training, is one of my clients. How do you handle that situation? Again, your wisdom. You are the therapist. You communicate the boundaries. You enforce the consequences of those boundaries. So think about it that way. Dual relationships are very tricky. Dual relationships can occur at any time. They are very easy to happen. And I highly encourage you to think about the dual relationships that you might find yourself in with your clients. If they can be avoided, avoid them at all costs because they can cost you your reputation again and they can harm the clients. If they can't be avoided, if you're the only therapist within 10 kilometers of wherever you live, maybe you live in the interiors of Kapsabet and you're the only therapist there. Maybe they come to you for therapy sessions and you also get to meet them when you go to the chief's meeting to talk about the issues affecting members of Kapsabet community, right? You're not going to avoid them, but there's a way that you can deal with it, right? So think about it along those lines that they can be avoided, they should be avoided, but there are situations where you might not be able to just go out there and be like, nope, I'm not talking to this client, or no, I can't interact with this client. These things happen qua ground, and that's why that's why we have this entire podcast, this entire channel, to talk about the issues that are rarely addressed in school when it comes to being a professional, when it comes to being a therapist outside in the real world. So think about it that way. Think about the fact that they can be avoided, they should be avoided, but when they can't be avoided, you need to use your wisdom to know how to interact with the client outside in the world, outside of the therapy office. The next touchy subject that is related to boundaries is fees and cancelling of sessions. Many therapists seem to struggle with a shame around money, asking to be paid on time. As a therapist, I would highly encourage you to have a cancellation policy, a lateness policy, and a rescheduling policy when it comes to therapy sessions. Do not be told by anybody that there is anything wrong with you needing to be compensated for your work. Remember, you are a professional who is trained, you've been to school, you've spent a lot of money in school, you've spent a lot of time in school and energy, you know what you're talking about when you are in therapy, you know what you are helping your clients do, and you need to be compensated for your work. It is work just like any other. You are a healthcare professional and healthcare professionals get compensated for the work that they do. So do not let anyone make you think that there's something wrong with you asking for compensation, adequate compensation, timely compensation from your clients. If your client is late to pay for their sessions, figure out how to talk about it. Do not ignore it, because you're teaching your client that even them, they can ignore their issues when they don't want to set a boundary. Remember, as I said in the beginning, everything that you're doing in therapy is modeling for the client what they should be doing in the real world. So if you are not setting boundaries, healthy boundaries with your clients, you're teaching them that they can also avoid setting boundaries in their life. When a situation is uncomfortable, like asking to be paid on time by your client, like telling them that you have a cancellation policy. When they cancel the session, they have to pay for it, especially if they cancel it last minute, maybe 5 minutes to the session, or when they are late, this is what happens. If you do not want to set those boundaries, you're teaching your client that they also can avoid difficult situations by not setting boundaries, just ignoring them. So think about it that way. And if you have any specific questions actually about fees and cancellation and things like that, rescheduling and policies around payments, do drop them in the comments as well. I can do an entire podcast episode about this entire topic, because I love talking about how therapists need to advocate for themselves. Because if you don't advocate for yourself, you are teaching your clients that they also do not need to advocate for themselves when they are being treated badly. So yeah, let's talk about fees a lot more. Let's talk about charging for services a lot more. Let's talk about not giving pro bono services just because you want to be seen as a good therapist. It's okay for you to give some pro bono sessions. If you do not have the capacity to do so, it's okay for you to go like, yeah, I just can't afford to give free sessions right now. And it's totally okay, because you have bills. Your family members need to eat. You need to put a roof over your head. You need to pay for your therapy office if you have one. If you use software for your virtual sessions, you need to pay for that as well. And those things all need money. So you can't really avoid the issue. Go ahead and set those boundaries and communicate them and enforce them. And as I said, we can talk about that in another episode. If you want to, just tell me in the comments and I will gladly talk about fees and payments and cancellations and rescheduling and all those things. Last but definitely not least, the next area that you need to set boundaries is the area of social media. You are on social media and so are your clients. And the biggest challenge that you're going to face is how blurry the boundaries can become when you are on the internet. What happens, for example, when you have posted a photo of yourself on your Instagram stories, you're wearing a bikini, you're at the beach, you're holding a nice drink, you're having the time of your life. And the first comment that you get, or the first DM reply that you get, is from your client saying, looking hot. What happens then? What happens when you are on Tinder and you see your client's profile, or they see your profile and they swipe right? What happens in that situation? And maybe you're notified. I don't know if Tinder notifies people when you swipe right on them. But anyway, think about it. You're on a dating site or wherever, or you are somewhere out there gallivanting with your friends and you post your photos on the internet just like everybody else, and your clients comment or they DM you to ask you personal questions. They ask you, is that your husband you're with? Is that your wife you're with on that photo? She looks nice. Sometimes clients will see you post something that they relate with. Maybe you are a content creator like myself. Do you accept for them to reply in the comments and be like, yeah, thank you for sharing this. I'm glad we talked about it in therapy last week and I can see that it's going to help many people. Are those things that you allow? What about if your client reposts your photo? Do you reply? Do you like? Do you comment? What do you do in that situation? And there are other many situations that are similar to that. So ask yourself all these questions regarding social media. How do you interact with your clients on the internet? Do you interact with your clients at all? Many therapists have found themselves in situations where they also hurt their clients, break boundaries by using their clients' stories as content for their social media. So you had a session with a client and you come to the internet to tell us about how that session was, what happened. And by the way, there was this client I was with. They were going through this thing. Aki, it was big. This is how we were handling it. Are those things that you do? The thing about social media is that it's very new, especially for mental health professionals. Our profession is very sensitive. You can't just go out there and talk about things the way you want to. It's very easy to engage in misinformation. It's very easy to break confidentiality and boundaries within the social media realm. And if you Google, you're going to see so many cases of therapists who have hurt their clients by talking about them on the internet, or who have had very uncomfortable interactions with their clients on social media. My biggest tip for this specific issue is to have a social media policy that already exists and that you talk about with your clients during the informed consent signing phase, if I may call it. When your client is coming to therapy for the first time, you guys are engaging for the first time. They are filling in the documents that they need to fill. You guys are talking about how the therapy is going to be like and what is bringing them to therapy. Make sure you talk about social media policy, especially if you're a therapist and you are on the internet. Especially if you're a therapist, you are on the internet with a personal profile. Remember, your clients are on the internet just as you are. But the thing is, you serve a huge role in their lives, and that role impacts them. Your clients will, if you have a personal profile, your clients will get to see you outside of the therapy room, and that can impact the way they view you as a therapist within the therapy room. So in general, social media is a very touchy subject. I have lots of tips and advice around that, which cannot fit within the span of this episode, but it's something that I would gladly talk about. If you have any questions, remember the comment section is your playground. Talk about that there. Ask me the questions and I will create an entire episode series if you want me to. As we come to the end of this episode, I'm going to leave you with one best practice for setting healthy boundaries with your clients. And that is, when you feel that a boundary has been violated, when you feel something is off, especially when it comes to therapeutic boundaries, I want you to communicate that as soon as it happens. Do not postpone. Do not say, I'm going to talk about this in the next session after we have finished addressing this session, yet that thing happened maybe last week before the session. I want you to address it as soon as it comes up. Use this time to describe how and why the particular behavior you are addressing at that time was inappropriate. Use that time to remind your client about the boundaries that you spoke about in the beginning of therapy. I am assuming you had a conversation about boundaries in the beginning of therapy regarding how you're going to handle each other within the therapeutic relationship. So when a boundary is crossed, when a boundary is violated, I want you to communicate that issue as soon as it happens. Do not postpone it. Do not sit there and become resentful. Do not sit there and start thinking the client should know they're the ones who did X, Y, and Z. That is just going to make it difficult for you and the client to advance when it comes to therapy. Highly encourage, talk to the client immediately something happens, enforce the boundary, remind the client of the consequences of violating a boundary and what happens when they do that, and what impact it has on the therapeutic relationship you have with them. If the client keeps violating the same boundary over and over again that you've already communicated, and you feel that you do not have the capacity to continue working with this client when they continue violating the boundary that you have been speaking about, then again, highly encourage that you refer this client out to another therapist. If you continue sitting with a client who is violating your own boundaries, then therapy is going to be ineffective. They're going to leave therapy thinking they can violate other people's boundaries. I'm going to repeat something that I keep saying. The therapeutic relationship that you have with your client models for the client what a healthy relationship should look like. So if the client does not think that in a healthy relationship you're supposed to respect other people's boundaries, then they are going to leave therapy and go and continue to suffer in the same ways that they suffer because they have not learned much in therapy. Boundaries are the backbone of every healthy relationship. Therapy is no different. In previous episodes that we have spoken about boundaries, I have broken down the format of setting a boundary, how to set a healthy boundary. I want you to go and listen to those. I want you to go and look at them. They are all linked in the description box of this episode, and you can find links to them. Read about boundaries, understand what it takes to set a boundary, how to set a boundary, and what happens when you set healthy boundaries, and how it can be beneficial to you and to your client when you set a healthy boundary. In the description box of this episode as well, I have added a link to an article that goes deeper on this topic of setting boundaries with your clients in therapy. And in there, you're going to find other tips other than the communication tip that I have given you. You're going to find other tips that you should read more about to understand how to set healthy boundaries with your clients. So again, check the description box for all the links to all the things that I am talking about. I want to equip you 100% with everything that you need for you to be successful as a therapist. If you're learning from and enjoying this type of content that I am creating, then I highly encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as going to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and other places where you find podcasts, and subscribing to this Conversations with a Therapist podcast. While you are there, I also encourage you to leave us a 5-star rating and a review so that other people can also get to know the kind of good work we are doing over here when it comes to advancing mental health conversations. If you have any questions for me, or any topics you would like me to cover, or any guests that you would like me to invite to the podcast for us to talk about stuff relating to mental health, then please drop all that in the comment section. Again, that is where all the magic happens. I promise you that I read all the comments that you share and I respond to them. Feel free to subscribe to Mental Wealth, which is the weekly newsletter that I write. It explores the arts and science of building a meaningful life in a chaotic world. Highly encourage that you check that out. Again, link in description, so that you can learn more about mental health and you can live a better life. That's it from me for now. Take care of yourself and take care of your mental health.